This episode of the Fiction Writers Podcast is brought to you by How to Write a Novel That Sells. Do you dream of writing a best-selling fiction novel? With the right tools, you could get there sooner than you think. Visit www.howtowriteanovelthatsells.com and unlock the secrets to writing compelling fiction taught by international best-selling author Lana McAra. Welcome to the Fiction Writers Podcast with Lana McAra, where you will discover tips, tricks, and ideas for fiction that is #unputdownable. Here you'll find new energy, new perspectives, new resources, and new ideas that will spark your creativity into a blaze of brilliance. It's easier than you think. Be sure you visit our website at www.fictionwriterspodcast.com. While you're there, subscribe to us via your favorite network. Now, get out your notebook, tune in, and let's get started.
Have you ever dreamed of being a bestseller, a New York Times bestseller? Well, that's what we're going to be talking about today. Welcome to the Fiction Writers Podcast, tips, tricks, and ideas for fiction that is #unputdownable. I can't wait to introduce you to my guest today, Ginny Myers Sain. Ginny is the author of Dark and Shallow Lies, Secrets So Deep, and One Last Breath from the Razorbill Books Penguin Teen imprint. Her debut novel, Dark and Shallow Lies, is a New York Times bestseller, an indie bookstore bestseller, a Barnes & Noble Young Adult Pick of the Month, an Amazon editor's pick, and Jenny, I'm running out of breath here. A 2022 Crystal Kite Award winner from the Society of Children's Book Writers and Illustrators. Jenny's books are available worldwide in 8 countries and counting. Although she's from a long line of writers, Jenny's first love has always been the theater, which I find fascinating. She has a degree in theater and has spent most of her career teaching, acting, and directing plays and musicals. Jenny currently lives in St. Cloud, Florida, with her college-age son and a wild golden doodle named Magnolia. When she's not working in the theater or writing, you're likely to find her listening to true crime podcasts, taking pictures of alligators, something we do a lot down here, eating tacos, traveling to spooky places, or hanging out at Walt Disney World. Welcome, Ginny.
Thank you. Thanks for having me today.
Well, tell us what led you into books. You're a theater person.
Sure, yeah. Like I said there in the bio, I grew up in a family of writers. My mother is a novelist. She has 19 traditionally published novels. Hers are mostly middle grade historical fiction. She also has a picture book. My father was a poet and a writer. So I grew up all the time around writers. There were always writers in and out of our house. My mother was always going to writers' conferences and writers' meetings and locking herself away. She had 3 kids and worked full-time as a teacher, an English teacher as well. So she was always locking herself away in the study to frantically work on whatever book was due next. So I always knew that writing was a real job that real people did, and I think that's kind of an advantage to grow up with. Grew up in a very literary household, books and reading and talking about books and poetry and stories were always a part of my life. Even my grandparents on both sides of the family and my great-grandparents going back generations were storytellers. Not always, written storytellers, but certain the oral storytelling tradition was very strong in my family. So story is something that I just really grew up surrounded by. I gravitated toward the theater as my sort of means of creative expression and my storytelling vehicle. Partly because I think I loved from the earliest I can remember. I remember performing plays and making up plays to perform when I was just tiny and could barely remember anything before that. So I think I was drawn to that. But also I think, there's partly an instinct to sort of set yourself apart from maybe what your family does. If your family are all artists, maybe you want to be an accountant or something different. I didn't choose a path that was that different, but I did gravitate toward a little bit different art form. I spent my life working in the theater, directing and teaching, still do that as well. But then COVID happened and sort of all the theater got shut down, of course, like everything got shut down, but theater and all of the live performing arts took a really big and dramatic hit, particularly, during that first year or so. And so I found myself at home without much to do. And like a lot of us, I don't knit or scrapbook or bake bread. So I needed a COVID hobby that was suitable. And I'd always had a book, I'd always kind of written, I knew I could write. I went to some high school writing programs and had written off and on, but I was never serious about it. I was always focused on theater. But I thought, well, if I'm going to get serious and sit down and actually do this, what better time than now when I'm basically locked in my house and nothing else to do and no creative expression. I always tell people it's also partly that a couple of years before that, my little brother had become the poet laureate for the state of Oklahoma, which is the state I grew up in and which I lived in at the time. And when your little brother becomes the poet laureate for the state that you live in, you feel like you've got to step up your game a little bit and do something to get yourself out there. So I decided I would sit down and try to write a book.
Wow. There's so many parallels that I see. I was that person who was locking myself away writing novels when I had kids, small kids. And my son is in the theater. He's a director and actor. He's on the board of directors of the theater that he performs at.
That's awesome.
Yeah. He has a full-time job, but he's definitely a theater man.
Oh, that's very cool.
Yeah. Yeah. So when did you first get published? And give us a little bit about the journey of your publishing.
Sure, yeah. Well, I had lived, I went to school in Arkansas. I grew up in Oklahoma, but I went to school in Arkansas, and got a degree in theater. And after I graduated, after a couple of years, I actually went back to that campus that I graduated from, and worked there with the theater department on campus. I actually ran a children's theater program at the university that would use the university facilities. And it was really geared toward kids that were very serious about theater. So these were pretty intense theater kids, particularly my high school students that I worked with were very intense and very serious about the craft of theater. And we kind of put together a program for them that was basically an AP theater class, so college prep theater. And I worked with them for a long time. But eventually, things changed, and the kids that I had been really attached to had graduated. And I decided I would move back to Oklahoma to be closer to my mother and my sister, who still lived in the Tulsa area. So I moved back there and didn't really know anyone. But my mother, as I mentioned, was a writer and was very involved in the Society of Children's Book Writers and Illustrators group there in Tulsa. And she said, well, you've always kind of written. Why don't you come to a couple of these writers' meetings with me? And the worst thing that could happen is you might meet some cool, creative people that you would enjoy hanging out with. And I thought, well, okay, I will go, but I'm definitely not going to write anything. And I did, and I went to the meetings and I taught some workshops for them on things theater people things that writers can learn from theater people about how we use dialogue and action on stage and some things like that, and had a good time and just kind of started hanging out with them more. And as generally happens, when you start hanging out with the wrong crowd, you get sort of drawn into whatever it is that they're doing. And the thing is, if you hang out with theater people, they start to eventually ask you questions like, what are you writing? And they really don't take no for an answer when you try to explain that you're not writing anything. You just really came to the meeting for the cookies. So I decided I should get it together and try to write. I had a couple of ideas and was kind of, working on some things. I got some really good feedback on those first couple of projects. Got really close with some agents on one of them, particularly. But it didn't quite pan out. And then COVID happened, and I thought, well, I've got this idea that I think is really a great idea. I hadn't really had time to sit down and finish it the way I wanted to, but I sat down and did that. And that was in the spring of 2020. So that first little bit of COVID, isolation that we were all in. And I was able to get an agent with that book pretty quickly. I got that agent in July of 2020. So just a couple of months, after I finished it up and tightened up the script, the book, the novel. And then we actually were able to sell that book in an auction about a month after that. So that happened really quickly. So that book sold in August or September, early September of 2020. And then it hit the shelves in August of 2021. So about 11 months later. That was Dark and Shallow Lies. Yeah.
That is just phenomenal. But that is also really a testament to the work you did for all those years with dialogue, with character, and this hands-on work in the theater, I find is so beneficial for creating believable stories, even as a novel.
I think, yeah, I think I don't know that I would have realized that at the time, but I think certainly all of the work I did with script analysis and with directing, particularly, and even working as an actor, you come to internalize a lot of things about story and about story structure and about character and about dialogue, just plotting in general, all of that. So absolutely, there are a lot of parallels and there's a lot that carries over between those two worlds, which has been really fun to see. I really didn't think about, I don't think when I started, how much overlap there would be and how many similarities there would be between my work and the theater and my work as a writer.
Yes, absolutely. Because I have worked with my son on getting his characters and helping him memorize his lines and things like that. And the conversations that happen from my side of the aisle, at the book world and in his world, it really does. It's been wonderful. I'm so happy that I can relate to him in those ways.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah, that just brings another depth to our relationship.
That's very cool. Yeah, it is.
Story structure is story structure, whether you're on stage or whether you're writing a book. So you got this contract, and what was the next steps? Because I want to just inform people of how this works for someone successful. We have been in the groups where we hear everybody complaining and sad and depressed, but I am so excited about giving a story about someone who actually was successful with this. So once you got the contract, what was your next step?
Well, I think the first thing that I think confuses people a little bit is that, there are two different kind of worlds out there in publishing. And there's a world of self-publishing, which, is not the one that I'm familiar with. So that's not one that I can fill in a lot of blanks in. But with traditional publishing, which is kind of the world that I operate and work in, I think it gets a little confusing because there's not a lot of information out there about how the process works. You're absolutely right. So getting that literary agent was that first step, and that's a big hurdle. It's difficult. You do a lot of what's called querying, sending out letters, basically saying, "Please be my literary agent. I need a literary agent," and you send sample pages, and mostly you get ignored. Because, a lot of literary agents receive literally hundreds of those cold queries in their inbox. So that's the first hurdle, is getting that agent. And then once you get that agent, a lot of times you'll do some revision work and some editorial work with that agent to get ready for submission. My agent and I did a little bit of that. We didn't have to do a lot of that because mine had been, I'd worked on it quite a bit, it was in pretty good shape. So we were able to go out on sub with that pretty quickly. For me, what happened is we sent that out on sub, to several editors, the top round of editors that we knew we wanted to do in the first round of submissions. And we had several that were interested that wanted to make an offer. So that ends up in what's, called an auction, which is basically just what it sounds like, where you've got multiple publishing houses that are bidding, and people do a round, and they come in with an offer. And then, there's another round of better offers until finally you get to the end where someone has made the best offer. And then you kind of choose which publisher you're going to go with. So I ended up at that time with Razorbill, which is an imprint of Penguin, Penguin Teen, Penguin Young Readers. And what happened, once you've made that deal and you've kind of signed that contract, I think is where, things kind of shift focus. And now you're not trying to sell a book. Of course, you've sold a book, and now you shift to working with an editor, on revisions and editing and tightening, and then just making that book ready to get to print, and all the fun stuff that goes with that, as far as, finding out cover designs and working with a marketing team and booksellers, and all of that kind of stuff kind of launches from there. And as a first time debut, kind of going into it, there's not, a good guide out there for, it was sort of a what to expect when you're selling a novel, like that, what to expect when you're expecting. Nobody really tells you what to expect. So you kind of feel your way through it. So I do try to talk about a lot about sort of that process and demystifying a little bit, and kind of pulling that curtain back and telling, writers how that works and how the process works.
Yes, yes. How long did it take from the time your book was accepted until it actually went to print? And I'm not talking about getting the books. I'm talking about it being completed to go to press. How long?
Sure, yeah. Let's see. The book sold. We signed the book was sold at auction in September of 2020. And the book came out in August of 2021. So it was 11 months from the auction to the time that book was on bookstore shelves, which is a really extraordinarily fast time.
Fast, yes.
Yeah, usually it's a couple of years. Oftentimes it's 2 years. But this was what they call a crash book, which means it came in late and they were working really fast to get it turned around quickly, because Razorbill that particular fall, the fall of 21, happened to have a slot that they wanted to fill, and they wanted to fill it with this book. So we worked really quickly. My editor had read the book, of course, and we had conversations on the phone. So she knew that the book wouldn't need a lot of editorial work. It was not going to be a heavy revision. It was just some tightening and some cleaning. So we were able to move through that process really quickly, move into cover design, and then from there move into copy edit. And past pages, which is when you look at it like an actual book. And it was printed and on the shelves less than a year later, which is pretty weird and fast for the world of traditional publishing.
Absolutely. I was traditionally published my first 20 books, and I never saw, after it went, quote unquote, to press, it was still a year after that.
Oh, yeah. What for Penguin particularly, there are a million different imprints. But my experience working with Razorbill was my imprint originally. Now it's Putnam Sons, which is also a Penguin imprint. I have the same editor, just a shift in imprint titles. For me, once we get to copy edits and past pages, then it goes to print fairly quickly, so that happens. That part of it is not a big delay. Mostly it's, the run up to that, making it through revisions and copy edits and past pages and design and all of that. For me lately, I've had, at this point now, I've had two book contracts with Penguin Random House. And for me, we've been on a sort of a book a year kind of schedule. So every book since then, there was a book in 2021. There was a book in 2022. There wasn't one in 2023 because that one is coming out very early in 2024 next month. So then there'll be another one following up after that. And it's been about a year in between each of those.
Mm-hmm. Right. So what was your public relations and marketing like at that point?
Sure. Yeah. My experience working with the marketing team at Penguin has been great. I have a great marketing team, really wonderful people that do a wonderful job. Marketing, the kind of marketing support you get from your publisher depends very much kind of on where you fall in the list, and how big the publisher is and how much money they're spending and how much they've paid you for your advance and all of that kind of stuff. So it's not uncommon for traditionally published authors to not get a lot of marketing support, particularly, for a smaller book or a book that is not getting as much push behind it. Mine might have been pretty big books for which they paid pretty high advances. So because of that, they tend to do a pretty great job marketing them, as you would expect, them to kind of step up. They're obviously much bigger books that get much more marketing and much more attention. But I've been really satisfied and very happy with the way they work. They do a lot of social media marketing. They do a lot of, pitching to festivals and interviews and all sorts of things. I also have a separate team that works in the UK. My books are published in the UK through Farshore, which is a imprint of HarperCollins UK. And I've got a great team over there as well. So I've been really happy with my PR and marketing experience.
And so do you have to, excuse me. Do you have to do interviews and appearances yourself as well?
I do. Yeah, absolutely. Some of those the team sets up for me with different, different people or different blogs or different magazines or whatever. Some of those I'll set up myself if someone reaches out to me, and says, hey, we'd like to have you like you did for this one. But yeah, I do quite a bit of that kind of thing, particularly in, the weeks leading up to a launch. Like I've got quite a few things, scheduled and going on over the next few weeks as we lead up to the release of One Last Breath on March 5th. So quite a few things here, quite a few things internationally. I'm with my UK publisher as well. So it's always kind of fun to try to do interviews there because there's such a big time difference, and we're trying to figure out like how that's going to work, and is the internet connection going to hold out, or is it going to happen? But yeah, I mean, and coming from the world of the theater, I like to talk. I'm comfortable talking to people in big groups, so I also do a lot of presenting at conferences and presenting at workshops and teaching and that kind of thing, and that's always fun. I really enjoy that.
Yes, yes. That brings a good point that if you are a successful author, speaking goes hand in hand with that. If you're not out there in the public, it's much more difficult to make any headway with your book sales.
It is, and I don't know, honestly, that the appearances that I do have made huge differences in sales, but they are certainly chances to connect with readers, and readers remember an author that they've had a personal experience with and will come back and buy another book. But it's all about, those appearances are sort of about building relationships with readers, building relationships with other writers, and trying to bring them kind of along with you, on the journey that you're on. And for me, because I enjoy that sort of thing a lot, I love doing it. I know that some, there's kind of a stereotype about writers that they're sort of introverted and shy and awkward. And sometimes that stereotype is there because it's true. And I certainly know a lot of writers that they'll do the public speaking and the things, but they really don't enjoy it. But I do very much. So I like to have those opportunities.
Another benefit being in theater. Yeah, that's really great. I also, I've got like a split personality. When I'm out in public, I'm fine, I'm great, I love it. But I also love coming back and hiding in my office.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, yeah. So talk a little bit about what happened to get you on the NYT bestseller list.
Sure. Yeah. Well, Dark and Shallow Lies, certainly most books from my imprint, and a lot of books in general that are traditionally published, not all of them, depending on who you're published with, but a lot of them come out in hardback first. They come out in hardback, and then a year later is when that paperback generally is released. So Dark and Shallow Lies had been out in hardback for about a year. And it was selling really well. It was very popular. It was doing well. It had not hit the New York Times list or anything at release, but it was doing really well. It was a strong seller. And everybody was talking about it. So there was a lot of attention. And then what happened really is that it was chosen as a Barnes and Noble YA Pick of the Month. And what happens when you're chosen as the Barnes & Noble YA Pick of the Month is that you have that book on a special table in every Barnes & Noble store in the entire country. So no matter what store you walked into, what Barnes & Noble you walked into, you would have seen a table right there at the front somewhere that would have said our YA Pick of the Month, and it would have been full of copies, paperback copies of Dark and Shallow Lies. Now, those books that they choose as the YA Pick of the Month, those are always books that are coming into paperback. So they're going to be the paperback books. So what happened is that book got chosen as a YA Pick of the Month for Barnes & Noble. It sold like wildfire in all of those Barnes & Noble stores all over the country, and it was promoted on their website and in their emails that they send out and their newsletters. So a lot of people had eyes on it, a lot of talking about it, and that was enough to push it over the edge and make it on the New York Times bestseller list, which was really exciting. It had already been on several other lists, Amazon lists and indie bookstore lists and quite a few other things. But of course, it's always fun to be able to say you're a New York Times bestseller. So that was a really exciting, unexpected thing, and it is one of those things that, it's very cool to be able to say that. It doesn't change a lot for you, except that you now get to say New York Times bestseller in front of your name, which is super awesome. So it's kind of like, Academy Award winner, whoever, it's a title that you'll get to keep. It doesn't matter, whether you do that again or not. But it's certainly been a little bonus and unexpected thing.
Yes, again, taking the steps, and it's not like a flash of lightning comes out of the sky,
right,
and strikes. You have to work through the process. You have to take the steps and show up and all of those things. I think it's interesting that some of the things that people value the most are actually not money makers.
Right. I mean, I think being able to put New York Times bestseller in front of your name is an attention getter. And I think that, that's on the cover of all my other books now, by New York Times bestselling author Ginny Myers Sain. And I think it probably, for some readers, might cause them to go, oh, okay, well, maybe I'll pick this up and give it a look. But I don't know that it's made a huge difference as far as anything else. It probably has gotten me in the door for some book festivals and some speaking engagements and things like that I might not have been chosen for otherwise. So it's been fabulous. It's been wonderful. It's not a complete game changer. If you think that you're going to wake up one day and be like, super, super famous and rich just because you hit the New York Times list, I have bad news about that. But it is fun to be able to say, certainly, and it's a cool thing to have out there in the world and an accomplishment. It is something to feel good about and be proud of. But you still got to get up that next day and write the next thing and work on the next project and send the next emails and, life kind of goes on.
Yes, it does. Yes, it does. That was my experience too, winning the Christie Award. That was awesome. And it really opened doors for me, but it did not have any selling, power.
Yeah, I mean, I think basically it's just a cool thing to say. I'm the thing I'm probably most proud of is that Dark and Shallow Lies won the Crystal Kite Award from the Society of Children's Book Writers and Illustrators, which is a really meaningful award because it's voted on by members of the Society of Children's Book Writers and Illustrators. So voted on by your peers, by other writers. And having grown up with my mother being a member of that organization and knowing what it meant to her, and just being, having SCBWI be a part of my life, my whole growing up, it just was a really meaningful thing to be able to call myself a Crystal Kite winner. So that's something that I'm equally proud of, although probably for a lot of people, it wouldn't hold quite the weight. But for me, for a lot of reasons, something that was really exciting.
Yes, exactly. It's that validation and the confidence that you have from it when your peers are honoring you in that way. Yes, absolutely. So, what advice would you give to someone who is got a book, a couple of books maybe, and they just don't really know what to do now? What would you say to them?
Yeah, I would say the best thing to do is to kind of do your research about what publishing path is best for you. I think there are lots of options now for being published. That didn't used to be the case. But now there are lots of different ways to kind of go about that process. I think there are probably pros and cons to pretty much any publishing avenue you might choose. But I would say my main bit of advice is before you choose to pursue either self-publishing or traditional publishing or kind of a hybrid of both, which is a thing that's available now, make sure you understand what you're choosing and why you're choosing that path and where that's going to take you, because they are sort of different paths that work, equally well, depending on what it is you're trying to accomplish and the kind of thing you're writing and all of that kind of stuff. So just kind of make sure you know what you're getting into before you kind of jump into it would be my main thing. The other advice, of course, across the board is always make sure you read widely in whatever it is that you're writing. Don't try to sit down and write a YA thriller having never read one. Make sure that you're aware, of those kinds of stories and how they're told and how they fit together and all of that stuff.
That is such great advice. Such great advice. Every writer should be a voracious reader in the genre that you are writing in. There are parameters. There are things that need to be adhered to. It's creative, yes, but you gotta color inside the lines. Those bookshelves have titles on them: fiction, nonfiction, adventure, sci-fi, all that stuff. And if they don't know where to put you, they're not going to put you anywhere. That's
right. And certainly, you can sort of cross genres and cross styles. My books are YA thrillers. I write YA because I directed teens for so long. Those were the voices I heard in my head. I felt really connected to them and their stories. That was just kind of the space I knew I wanted to write in. But they're thrillers that also have some paranormal elements. They have some coming of age elements. Although Dark and Shallow Lies is a mystery and a thriller, it's also very much a story about grief. So you can definitely cross sort of lines and blend genres. But you do need to make sure, that you know what genres you're blending, and what kind of story you're trying to tell.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Well, thank you so much, Jenny. This has been amazing. I'm so glad you found time to carve out for me and my podcast.
Oh, I'm so glad. These podcasts are one of my favorite things to do, so I'm always glad to talk. That's great.
Yes, thank you so much. Just speak out your website address or any other information because
Sure, yeah. My website is GinnyMyersSain.com, GinnyMyersSain.com. You can find me there. I'm on social media. You can find me on Instagram. That's probably where I'm most active, Ginny Myers Sain. I also have an author Facebook page. So I post a lot of things on there, on Threads and what used to be Twitter. I think we're calling it X now, but all of those good things. So I'm on all of those. Definitely follow along if you're interested in book stuff. I talk a lot about writing, but I also talk a lot about, book events and fun things that are coming up. And I'm always glad to answer questions on social media. If you're a writer and you have a question or you're working on something or, just pop in and on my social media, say hello and introduce yourself. And I'm always glad to chat.
thank you so much. And thank you so much for being with us today. See you next.
Oh, you're so welcome. Thanks for the invitation.
Thank you for tuning into the Fiction Writers Podcast with Lana McAra, where we share tips, tricks, and ideas for fiction that is #unputdownable. Remember to visit our website at www.fictionwriterspodcast.com and enjoy even more great episodes like this one. Again, while you're here, subscribe to us via your favorite network. We look forward to seeing you next time on the Fiction Writers Podcast.